I still remember the scorching sun beating down on my back as I trudged along the dusty road, my feet aching with every step. It was a familiar pain, one that I'd grown accustomed to over the years. You see, I couldn't afford the bus fare, so I had to walk miles every day to get home from school. It was a struggle that seemed endless, a never-ending cycle of physical and emotional exhaustion. As I walked, I'd often find myself lost in thought, dreaming of a better life. A life where I didn't have to worry about how I'd get to school or whether I'd have enough food to eat. A life where I could focus on my studies, on my future, without the weight of poverty holding me back. But those dreams seemed like a distant fantasy, a luxury I couldn't afford. My hometown was a small, rural town, surrounded by rolling hills and vast fields. It was a beautiful place, but one that seemed to be stuck in time. The roads were unpaved, the houses were old and worn, and the people were struggling, just like me. As I walked, I'd see the buses driving by, filled with people who had the luxury of affording the fare. I'd watch them with a mix of envy and determination. I knew that I couldn't give up, that I had to keep pushing forward, no matter how hard it got. But little did I know, my life was about to take a dramatic turn. One that would change everything, and set me on a path towards a future I never could have imagined. I'll never forget the day I met Sarah. She was a teacher at my school, and she had taken a particular interest in me. I was struggling to make ends meet, and she could see the desperation in my eyes. She approached me after class one day and asked me about my situation. I opened up to her, sharing my struggles and my feelings of hopelessness. She listened attentively, her eyes filled with compassion and understanding. When I finished talking, she put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You are not alone. I believe in you, and I know you can get through this." Her words were like a breath of fresh air, filling me with a sense of hope that I hadn't felt in years. Sarah took me under her wing, offering me support and guidance whenever I needed it. She helped me to see that there was a way out of my struggles, that I didn't have to be defined by my poverty. She encouraged me to start making plans for a better future, to think about what I wanted to achieve and how I could make it happen. For the first time in my life, I started to feel like I had a sense of purpose. I began to see that I wasn't just a poor kid from a poor neighborhood, but a person with potential and possibilities. I started to dream big, to imagine a life where I wasn't held back by my circumstances. With Sarah's help, I started to make progress. I began to focus on my studies, to work hard and earn good grades. I started to see that education was the key to unlocking a better future, and I was determined to make the most of it. As I walked to school each day, I felt a sense of determination that I had never felt before. I knew that I still had a long way to go, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. I felt like I was taking control of my life, like I was shaping my own destiny. But just as things were starting to look up, I faced a new challenge. My family's financial situation took a turn for the worse, and I was forced to take on even more responsibility. I had to balance my schoolwork with a part-time job, all while trying to keep my family afloat. It was a daunting task, but I was determined to succeed. I was determined to prove to myself and to everyone else that I was capable of overcoming any obstacle. I still remember the countless miles I walked, the scorching sun beating down on my back, the sweat dripping from my brow. It was a grueling routine, but one that I had grown accustomed to. After all, when you're too poor to afford bus fare, walking becomes your only option. But something changed within me after I hit rock bottom. I realized that I couldn't continue living in poverty, that I had to fight for a better life. With newfound hope, I started to work towards my goals. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to succeed. I started by learning new skills, devouring books from the local library, and watching tutorials online. I taught myself how to code, how to design, and how to market. It wasn't easy, and there were many late nights spent staring at a computer screen, but I was driven by a fierce determination. As I gained experience, I started to apply for jobs, but rejection after rejection piled up. It was disheartening, to say the least, but I refused to give up. I knew that success rarely comes overnight, and that every no brought me closer to a yes. And then, slowly but surely, I started to see progress. I landed a small freelance project, and then another and another. My portfolio grew, and with it my confidence. I started to see the fruits of my labor, and it was exhilarating. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. I faced setbacks and failures along the way. There were times when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I was good enough. But I persevered, reminding myself that every successful person has experienced failure at some point in their journey. Through it all, I learned the value of hard work and perseverance. I learned that success is not a destination, but a journey, and that every step forward, no matter how small, brings you closer to your goal. And then, just as I was starting to find my footing, I saw an opportunity that would change my life forever. I still remember that day vividly. It was a typical Monday morning, the sun shining bright, a slight breeze in the air, and the sound of buses rushing by on the main road. I was sitting at my small desk, staring at the stack of papers and documents in front of me. It was then that I received the call that would change everything. The owner of the transportation company I had spent years riding as a passenger, and often walking because I couldn't afford the fare, was willing to sell. The very same company that had been a constant reminder of my struggles was now within my grasp. I couldn't believe it. At first, I was hesitant. I had worked so hard to get to where I was, and the thought of taking on such a huge responsibility was daunting. What if I failed? What if I wasn't good enough? The doubts swirled in my head, but as I sat there, something inside me clicked. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. I began to see the potential. I thought about all the people who, like me, had to walk miles because they couldn't afford the fare. I thought about the difference I could make. I gathered my resources, made a plan, and took a deep breath. It was time to take the leap. I spent the next few weeks in a whirlwind of meetings, negotiations, and sleepless nights. My heart was racing with anticipation as I signed my name on the dotted line, and just like that, it was done. I was the new owner of the transportation company. The thrill of victory was intoxicating. But as I looked around at the rows of buses, the dusty offices, and the employees staring back at me, I knew that this was just the beginning. I had taken the risk, seized the opportunity, and now the real challenge lay ahead, running the company. But little did I know this would prove to be the most difficult journey of my life. I still remember the day I walked into my new office as the owner of the transportation company. It felt surreal, like a dream I was waiting to wake up from. But the reality check came sooner rather than later. Being a leader wasn't as glamorous as I thought it'd be. In fact, it was downright difficult. The employees were hesitant to accept me, this new, young owner who had seemingly come out of nowhere. They whispered among themselves, their skeptical glances piercing through me like knives. The drivers, the maintenance staff, everyone seemed to be waiting for me to slip up so they could say, "I told you so." The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of their resistance bearing down on me. But it wasn't just the employees. The customers, too, were curious about this new development. Some of them were concerned about the changes I'd bring, while others were outright hostile. They'd been used to the old way of doing things, and I was disrupting their comfort zone. I received complaints about routes being altered, schedules being changed, and even the new uniforms I'd designed. It was like no matter what I did, I couldn't win. As if these external challenges weren't enough, I was struggling to keep up with the financials, too. The company had been running on autopilot for years, and it was clear that the previous owners had been more interested in lining their pockets than in investing in the business. The accounts were a mess, the maintenance costs were through the roof, and to top it all, there were several debts that needed to be paid off. I was hemorrhaging money left and right, and I didn't know how to stop the bleeding. There were many nights when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I'd bitten off more than I could chew. Had I made a mistake by buying this company? Was I cut out for this job? The doubts crept in, making me question my own abilities. But I couldn't let them win. I thought back to all those miles I'd walked, all those struggles I'd faced, and how I'd overcome them. I reminded myself of the reason I'd taken on this challenge in the first place, to make a difference. And so, with renewed determination, I set out to find a way to thrive, to prove to myself and everyone else that I was more than just a poor kid who got lucky. I still remember the first day I walked into that rundown transportation company, the smell of worn leather seats, and the sound of coughing engines lingering in the air. It was a relic of a bygone era, a reminder of the struggles I had faced myself, walking miles because I couldn't afford the bus fare. But now, as the owner, I was determined to turn it around. I started by talking to the employees, listening to their concerns and ideas. They were a weary bunch, worn down by years of neglect and poor management. But as I listened, I saw a spark of hope in their eyes. They wanted to make a difference, to be part of something better. I invested in training programs, teaching them new skills and empowering them to take ownership of their work. I also made sure to reward their hard work, offering bonuses and recognition for a job well done. Next, I turned my attention to the customers. I rode the buses, talking to passengers and listening to their complaints. I took note of the dirty seats, the broken air conditioning, and the erratic schedules. And then I set out to fix them. I invested in new buses, equipped with comfortable seats and reliable air conditioning. I implemented a new scheduling system, ensuring that buses ran on time and frequently enough to meet demand. And I made sure to respond to customer complaints, listening to their concerns and offering solutions. It wasn't easy, of course. There were setbacks and failures, moments when I doubted my own abilities. But I persevered, driven by my vision of a better transportation company. And slowly, incrementally, I started to see positive results. Ridership increased, and with it, revenue. Employees began to smile, to take pride in their work, and customers, once wary of the old buses, began to trust us again. I remember the day I saw a group of school children, laughing and chatting as they rode to school on one of our new buses. Their parents, who had once worried about the safety and reliability of our transportation, now smiled and waved as they watched their kids ride off. It was a small moment, perhaps, but it was a sign that we were on the right track. And as I watched the bus drive away, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. I had walked miles because I was too poor for bus fare, but now I was making a difference, one bus ride at a time. But just as I was starting to feel comfortable, to feel like we were finally making progress, I received an offer that would change everything. As I sat in my office, staring out the window at the buses that now bore the logo of my company, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. We had come a long way since those early days of struggling to stay afloat. I remembered the long walks I used to take, the weight of my backpack digging into my shoulders, the sweat dripping down my face. It all seemed like a lifetime ago. But now I was faced with a new challenge. A group of investors had approached me, eager to take my company to the next level. They spoke of expansion, of new markets and opportunities, of growth and profit. I was hesitant at first, hesitant to let outsiders in, to compromise on my vision. But as I listened to their proposals, as I saw the fire in their eyes, I began to see the potential. It wasn't just about the money, although that was certainly a factor. It was about the chance to make a real difference, to leave a mark on the world. I thought back to those long walks, to the people I had met along the way, to the struggles I had faced. I thought about the employees who now worked for me, about the families they supported, about the communities we served. I took a deep breath and made the decision. I would partner with the investors. I would take the leap and see where it would lead. It was a risk, I knew, but it was also an opportunity. And as I signed the papers, as I shook hands with my new partners, I felt a sense of excitement and anticipation. I knew that this was just the beginning, that there would be challenges ahead. But I was ready. I was ready to take on the world, to make my mark, to leave a legacy. And as I looked out the window at the buses that now bore the logo of my company, I smiled. I knew that I had come a long way, but I also knew that I was just getting started. I still remember the feeling of walking miles because I couldn't afford the bus fare. It was a struggle that seemed endless at the time, but it's a memory that I now cherish. As I sit here, reflecting on my journey, I realize that financial success isn't the only thing that matters. Don't get me wrong, it's a great feeling to be able to afford the things I need and want, but it's not the real reward. The real reward is the impact I've had on others. It's the people I've met along the way, the ones who helped me when I needed it most. It's the employees who work for me now, who have families to feed and dreams to chase. It's the community that has supported me and that I now have the opportunity to give back to. I think about the long walks, the struggles, and the sacrifices I made to get to where I am today. And I realize that it was all worth it, not just because of the financial success, but because of the people I've met and the lives I've touched. I think about the bus drivers who used to pass me by and how I now own the entire transportation company. It's a surreal feeling, but it's also a reminder that anything is possible with hard work and determination. But as I look back on my journey, I also think about the people who are still struggling, the ones who are still walking miles because they can't afford the bus fare, the ones who are still fighting to make ends meet. And I realize that I have a responsibility to use my success to make a difference. I start to think about how I can give back, how I can use my resources to help those in need. I think about starting a foundation or a scholarship program. I think about volunteering my time and using my platform to raise awareness about the issues that matter most to me. As I sit here, reflecting on my journey, I realize that the real reward is not just about achieving financial success, but about using that success to make a positive impact on the world. And so I start to plan, to think about how I can use my success to make a difference. I start to think about the next chapter in my life, one that is focused on giving back. I still remember the countless miles I walked, the weight of my poverty bearing down on me like a physical force. But life has a way of coming full circle, and now I'm in a position to make a real difference. I've decided to use my success to give back to the community that once struggled alongside me. I started by investing in local businesses and initiatives, hoping to create opportunities for those who were once in my shoes. It wasn't easy. There were plenty of challenges along the way, from bureaucratic red tape to resistance from those who didn't share my vision. But I was determined to push through, driven by the memory of my own struggles. As I walked through the streets of my hometown, I saw the impact of my efforts beginning to take shape. New shops and restaurants were opening, creating jobs and injecting life into the local economy. Community centers and programs were sprouting up, providing support and resources for those who needed them most. And the people were beginning to smile again, their faces filled with a sense of hope and possibility. I remember one woman in particular, a single mother who had been struggling to make ends meet. She came to me in tears, thanking me for the job I had created for her at one of my new businesses. She told me that she was finally able to provide for her children, to give them the life they deserved. And in that moment, I knew that it was all worth it. Of course, there were still challenges ahead. There were those who doubted me, who said that I was foolish to invest in this community. But I knew that they were wrong. I knew that with hard work and determination, we could build something truly special here. And as I looked out over the town, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. I had come a long way from those days of walking miles because I couldn't afford bus fare. I had achieved my dreams, and now I was using my success to make a real difference. And as I looked to the future, I knew that I would continue to fight for this community, to use my resources to uplift and empower those around me. The journey was far from over, but I was ready for whatever came next. As I sit in my office, surrounded by the hum of buses and the chatter of employees, I am filled with a sense of pride and accomplishment. I think back to the days when I had to walk miles because I couldn't afford the bus fare, and I am reminded of how far I've come. I've achieved success, not just for myself, but for my community as well. I reflect on the lessons I've learned along the way, the importance of perseverance, the value of hard work, and the power of believing in oneself. I think about the people who have been impacted by my journey, the lives that have been changed, and the opportunities that have been created. As I look out the window, I see the buses that now bear my company's name, and I am filled with a sense of pride and ownership. I think about the legacy I want to leave behind, the impact I want to make on the world. I want my story to inspire others, to show them that no matter where they come from or what challenges they face, they too can achieve greatness. I know that my story will be told and retold, and that it will inspire others to chase their dreams just as I did. I know that I've made a difference, and that my legacy will live on long after I'm gone. And with that thought, I am filled with a sense of peace and contentment, knowing that I've left my mark on the world. I take a deep breath, and I smile, knowing that I've come full circle. I've walked miles, but I've also traveled far beyond my wildest dreams. And as I look out at the world, I know that I'm ready for whatever comes next, knowing that I've left behind a legacy that will inspire and uplift others for generations to come.